Is this some kind of joke? The woman's voice was sharp. It cut through the quiet hum of the gun store's air conditioning. Her name was Karen. She was the store manager. The old man's name was George Miller. He was 84 years old. He stood patiently at the glass counter. His reflection was pale and bent over next to her bright, mean one. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on an old rifle mounted on the wall behind her. He had carried one just like it through the frozen hell of a war in Korea. Her question hung in the air. A deliberate insult. The other two customers in the store, both younger men, shifted their feet. They suddenly found the rows of polished guns very interesting. The fluorescent lights of Eagle Armory were bright and harsh. They made the store feel more like a hospital than a place that sold guns. It was a fancy store, all shiny metal and displays. Karen, the store manager, looked like the store. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail. Her polo shirt with the store's logo was starched and crisp. She looked at George like he was a piece of dirt on her perfect world. His clothes were simple and worn. A crisp white button-down shirt, neat khaki pants, polished brown shoes. To her, he was old and out of place, a relic who had wandered in from a long time ago and was now getting her clean glass dirty. "Sir," she said. She drew out the word until it became a mockery. "This is a serious place of business. We sell expensive tools, not toys for old men to play with. Are you going to buy something, or are you just here to look at old memories?" George finally moved his eyes from the rifle to her. They were pale blue, clouded by age, but holding a depth that seemed to absorb the harsh lighting and give nothing back. "I'd like to buy that rifle," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that seemed to come from his chest, not his throat. It held no shake, no hint of being upset. Karen let out a short laugh. She didn't believe him. She leaned forward. She placed her perfectly painted fingernails on the counter. "That is a collector's piece, a fully working battle rifle. It's $5,000, and frankly, you don't look like you're in the market for a $5,000 wall decoration." Behind her, a young employee named Tyler had been restocking ammunition. He froze. He looked from his boss's mean face to the old man's calm one. A knot of discomfort tightened in his stomach. He knew Karen could be rude, but this was a new level of cruel. "I know the price," George said. His tone didn't change. "I also know how it works. I'm not going to hang it on a wall." This seemed to fuel Karen's mean attitude. "What are you going to do with it? Take it to the range, sir? The recoil on that rifle could hurt your shoulder. You have to be able to handle a gun like that safely. Our insurance policy, not to mention my conscience, requires that I only sell to competent, responsible people." The message was clear. She thought him weak, confused, and dangerous. A problem. One of the other customers, a man in his late 20s wearing a tactical vest and a beard, chuckled under his breath. He was here to pick up a custom rifle. And this little show was amusing. The other customer, a younger man in a simple hoodie, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He had a military-style haircut. His eyes kept looking at the old man, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "I can assure you," George said, his patience deep and unshakable, "I am competent." "I'll be the judge of that," Karen snapped. "Let's see your paperwork, driver's license, gun permit, and proof of address. And I'll need to run a background check, of course, assuming you even pass." She tapped a long red nail on the counter impatiently. "Chop, chop. I don't have all day." Slowly, deliberately, George reached into the back pocket of his pants. He pulled out a leather wallet. It was ancient. The dark brown leather was worn smooth and soft as cloth in some places, cracked and lined with 1,000 fine cracks in others. The stitching was frayed. A dark, faded stain marked one corner. He laid it on the glass counter. The sound it made was a soft, tired sigh. Karen wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Seriously, is that thing going to fall apart on my counter?" As George's old fingers worked with the clasp, the world for him momentarily dissolved. The smell of gun oil and air conditioning was replaced by the biting metallic scent of snow and gunpowder. The bright store lights faded into the gray, unforgiving sky of North Korea in the winter of 1950. He wasn't seeing Karen's sneering face. He was seeing the face of his squad leader, Sergeant Tommy Jenkins, 19 years old and aged 100 years by war. Tommy was pressing this very wallet into his hand, just hours before the enemy swarmed their position. "Here," Tommy had said. His breath was white in the freezing air. Yours is soaked through? Keep your girl's picture in this one. It's good leather. It'll bring you home. The memory was a lightning strike, there and gone in an instant. Tommy never made it home. The wallet did. George carefully pulled out his driver's license and the necessary permits. His hands were slow but perfectly steady. He pushed them across the counter. Karen snatched them up. She looked at the license closely, her eyes narrowing. George Miller, 84 years old, she said. Here you live over in the old Veterans Housing Complex. Figures. She turned to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with noisy, aggressive clicks. All right, George. Let's see what secrets you're hiding. The young man in the hoodie had seen enough. He had watched the entire exchange. His anger was a slow burn. He wasn't just any customer. He was a recently discharged Army Ranger, Sergeant Jake Harlan. He had spent 4 years in Afghanistan, and he knew a soldier when he saw one. He didn't know the old man's story, but he recognized the bearing. It was in the straightness of his back despite his age. It was in the unnerving stillness of his hands. It was in the quiet dignity that absorbed every insult Karen threw and reflected nothing back. Most of all, it was in his eyes. Jake had seen eyes like that before, in the faces of men who had seen and done things that civilians like Karen could never understand. The way she had mocked the old wallet was the final straw. For Jake, a man's wallet, his dog tags, a worn lighter, these weren't just objects. They were pieces of a life, containers of memory and sacrifice. Karen's disrespect was more than just rude. It was wrong, deeply wrong. While she was busy at the computer making loud sighs and muttering about the slowness of the system, Jake quietly pulled out his phone. He walked to the far end of the store near a rack of hunting clothes, pretending to browse. He didn't call the police. He knew that would only make things worse and embarrass the old man more. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in a year, a number he was given by his former company commander when he left the service. It was a direct line to the public affairs office at Fort Jackson, the big military base just 20 miles outside of town. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Sergeant Major Brooks. Sergeant Major, this is Jake Harlan. We met last year. I was in Alpha Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion. I remember you, Harlan. What can I do for you? Brooks's voice was all business. Sir, I'm at Eagle Armory on the north side of town, Jake said. He kept his voice low. There's an elderly veteran here, and the manager she's treating him with extreme disrespect, humiliating him in front of everyone. I think he's trying to buy a rifle, and she's treating him like a confused old fool. A lot of old-timers out there, Harlan. What's his name? She said it out loud when she took his license. His name is George Miller. There was a deep silence on the other end of the line. Jake thought for a second the call had been dropped. Sergeant Major, are you there? The voice that came back was completely different. The gruff, business-like tone was gone, replaced by something Jake had only ever heard from senior soldiers in moments of extreme crisis. It was a voice of pure, compressed urgency. Harlan, what did you say his name was? George Miller, sir. Stay where you are. Do not get involved. Do not let him leave the store if you can help it. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Jake stood frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear. He had expected a thanks for the tip or a we'll look into it. He had not expected a reaction that sounded like someone had just announced a national emergency. Something was happening. Something big. Inside the public affairs office at Fort Jackson, Sergeant Major Thomas Brooks was already moving. He didn't run, but he moved with a speed and purpose that made everyone in the office stop what they were doing and stare. He went straight to the UAU secure computer in the corner, one reserved for looking at classified personnel files. He typed in the name, Miller, George T. He hit enter. The screen blinked. Then a file appeared. It was 90% blacked out. Entire paragraphs were covered, but the words that remained were enough to make the blood drain from Brooks's face. Chosen Reservoir Survivor, 5th Special Forces Group, Vietnam, Project Gamma, classified, Instructor, U.S. Army Sniper School, classified, and then at the top a single gleaming line of text beside a small pixelated photo of a young man with old eyes. Medal of Honor, Congressional. Citation classified. Action date December 2nd, 1950. Brooks let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He walked stiff-legged directly to the office of the base commander, Colonel Michael Donovan. He didn't knock. He opened the door and stood in the doorway. He interrupted a meeting Donovan was having with two civilian contractors. "Sir," Brooks said. His voice was tight. "We have a situation." Donovan looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Sergeant Major? This had better be important." "It is, sir," Brooks said, his eyes like steel chips. "George Miller is in a gun store downtown, and the manager is about to call the police on him for being old." Colonel Michael Donovan's face went through a rapid series of emotions. First annoyance, then confusion, then dawning understanding, and finally a deep, bone-chilling alarm. He stood up so quickly his chair banged against the furniture behind him. "Get the car," he said to Brooks. His voice was a low, dangerous command. "Get my honor guard detail and 2 MP units. Now." He turned to the bewildered contractors. "Gentlemen, this meeting is over." Back at Eagle Armory, Karen was enjoying her power. The background check had come back clean, of course, but she wasn't going to tell George that. She had decided she was going to refuse the sale on principle. It was her store, her rules. "Well, George," she said. She turned away from the computer with a triumphant smirk. "It seems your record is clean, but that doesn't change the facts. I am not comfortable selling a weapon of this type to a man of your advanced age. It's a matter of public safety, so I'm going to have to refuse the sale." George simply nodded, his face unreadable. He reached for his wallet and IDs. Karen said. She placed her hand over his. "Not so fast. The fact that you're here trying to buy a military rifle at your age, frankly, it's concerning. I think I have a responsibility to make a call. A wellness check, perhaps, to make sure you're being properly cared for, that you're all there." She tapped her temple meaningfully. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here. I'm calling the police, for your own good. You understand?" This was it, the final unforgivable insult. She was threatening to have him arrested or put in a home, treating him like a child. A broken object to be handled by the authorities. The man in the tactical vest was now openly grinning. Enjoying the show. Tyler, the young employee, looked like he was about to be sick. Jake Harlan, still by the clothes rack, simply watched the front door, his jaw set. George said nothing. He just looked at her, and for the first time Karen felt a flicker of doubt. There was something in his gaze, a stillness that went beyond patience. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. It was the absolute lack of fear of a man who had walked through the worst hells and had come out the other side. Before she could pick up the phone, a strange sound came into the store. It was the sound of tires on pavement. Many of them, moving in perfect order, a low hum of powerful engines. Then the flash of red and blue lights pulsed through the store's large windows, bathing the entire room in silent, urgent strobes of color. 2 black SUVs and a military police car had pulled into the parking lot. They formed a neat, imposing line in front of the store. They hadn't used their sirens. That silence was somehow more scary than if they had. Doors opened together. Colonel Donovan, in his perfect uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was joined by Sergeant Major Brooks and 2 grim-faced military police officers in full gear. The bell on the store's door chimed softly as the 4 men entered. The air temperature seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Every person in the store, Karen, Tyler, the 2 other customers, froze. The sheer overwhelming authority that had just walked through the door was a physical force. Colonel Donovan's eyes scanned the room, instantly dismissing everyone until they landed on George Miller. A look of deep, undisguised reverence washed over the colonel's face. He walked forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the concrete floor. He ignored Karen completely, walking right past the counter as if she were a piece of furniture. He stopped exactly 3 steps in front of George. In the dead silent room, Colonel Donovan brought his heels together with a sound like a gunshot. He raised his right hand in the sharpest, most perfect salute Karen had ever witnessed. It was not a gesture of casual respect. It was an act of absolute reverence. "Mr. Miller," the colonel's voice was clear, strong, and filled with respect that bordered on awe. "Colonel Michael Donovan, commanding officer of Fort Jackson, "Sir, it is an honor to finally meet you." Behind him, Sergeant Major Brooks and the two MPs snapped to attention and gave their own salutes. George looked at the colonel. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He gave a slow, almost weary nod of his head. "At ease, Colonel." The four soldiers relaxed, but their posture remained perfectly straight. Their attention focused solely on the old man in the white shirt. Karen stood behind the counter, her mouth hanging open. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This shuffling old man was being saluted by a full colonel. Colonel Donovan then turned slightly, not to address Karen directly, but to speak for the benefit of everyone in the room. His voice took on a formal tone. "For those of you who are unaware," he began, his eyes still on George, "you are in the presence of an American hero. George Miller enlisted in the United States Army in 1948. He fought with the 1st Marine Division at the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, where he was one of the few to walk out of a trap that killed thousands of American soldiers." He paused. "It was there, on a frozen ridge line, that he single-handedly held off an enemy platoon, saving the lives of a dozen wounded men in his company. For that action, President Truman awarded him the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp went through the store. The man in the tactical vest looked like he had been struck by lightning. Jake Harlan felt a surge of fierce pride. The colonel wasn't finished. After Korea, Mr. Miller became one of the first members of the Army's Special Forces. He served multiple classified tours in Southeast Asia, operating behind enemy lines in conditions you cannot even imagine. When he finally returned home, he didn't retire. He became the lead shooting instructor at the Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, where he trained generations of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. He gestured to the rifle on the wall. The rifle he was attempting to purchase today was a personal request from me. We are opening a new exhibit at the Fort Jackson Military Museum, and Mr. Miller, as the foremost expert on historical American military firearms, graciously agreed to acquire and prepare the piece for our display. He finally turned his gaze on Karen. His eyes were not angry. They were cold, dead things filled with icy contempt. "And you," he said. His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "We're going to call the police on him. For his own good." Karen's face had gone from smug to confused to completely white. She looked like a ghost. I didn't know," she stammered. He just looked, he looked old. He looked old," the colonel finished for her. "You judged a book by its cover, and you have no idea the library you just insulted." Before he could continue, George held up a frail hand. "That's enough, Colonel." All eyes turned to him. His voice was still quiet, but it commanded the room. He looked at Karen, not with anger or triumph, but with a deep, weary sadness. "Ma'am," he said, "respect isn't something you give people because of the uniform they wear or the medals on their chest. You give it because they're a human being. The young man who bags your groceries, the woman who cleans your office, the old man who wants to buy a rifle. They all deserve the same basic dignity. That's the lesson. I hope you learn it someday." As he spoke, he touched the worn leather of his wallet on the counter. The image flashed in his mind again, sharp and clear. Young Sergeant Tommy Jenkins, 19 years old, dying in the snow. His last words, a whispered plea, "Tell them we fought like hell." The wallet wasn't just a holder for his ID. It was a promise he had kept for over 70 years. A promise to live a life worthy of the one Tommy had lost. Colonel Donovan nodded stiffly. He turned back to Karen. "As of this moment, any and all contracts between Fort Jackson and Eagle Armory are hereby terminated. We will not do business with a place that treats our nation's heroes with such contempt. Sergeant Major, pay the woman for the rifle." Sergeant Major Brooks stepped forward. He produced a government credit card and completed the transaction in grim silence. Karen, moving like a robot, packaged the rifle. The MPs took possession of it. The colonel then turned to George. "Sir, will you allow us to give you a ride home?" George nodded. "I'd like that very much, Michael." As the soldiers respectfully escorted George Miller out of the store, the bell chimed his departure. The remaining people were left in a stunned, ringing silence. 3 weeks later, Karen was working the late shift at a diner 20 miles from town. The story had gone viral locally. Videos recorded by the man in the tactical vest were everywhere. Her business had collapsed within days. This job was all she could find. Her hair was down. Her face was pale without makeup. And her uniform was a cheap apron stained with coffee. The bell on the diner door chimed. An old man in a white shirt walked in and took a seat at the counter. It was George Miller. Karen froze, a pot of coffee shaking in her hand. She thought he was there to gloat, to rub her nose in it one last time, but he just looked at the menu. "I'll just have a cup of black coffee, please," he said, his voice exactly the same as it was in the store, quiet, calm. Her hands trembling, she poured the coffee and set it in front of him. He smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said. He drank his coffee in silence, watching the traffic pass by outside the window. When he was done, he placed a $10 bill on the counter. More than enough for the coffee, and stood to leave. "Have a good night," he said, and walked out. Karen stared at the $10 bill. She looked at his back as he left. He hadn't come for revenge. He had come for coffee. He had treated her with simple, basic dignity, the very thing he had spoken about. The lesson, delivered not with a shout but with a quiet gesture, landed with the force of a physical blow. She finally understood, and for the first time in a very long time, Karen felt a deep and painful sense of shame. It was a beginning. The stories of heroes like George Miller are all around us, hidden in plain sight. They are our neighbors, our family, and the quiet strangers we pass on the street. If you were moved by this story, please like and share it to spread the message of respect.